The question that we're answering here is, what is the leaf thickness of a hinge? And the leaf thickness of a hinge, or sometimes referred to as gauge of metal, is simply stated as how thick is the leaf of the hinge. So I happen to have a relatively unusual hinge here called a raised barrel, but just ignore the fact that it's a raised barrel hinge. We're really only talking about the leaf thickness. So how thick this leaf is of the hinge is exactly what we're discussing. The leaf thickness is directly related to the size of the hinge and the duty of the hinge. You can have light duty, standard commercial duty, or standard duty, and then heavy duty. And then the size of each of those three hinge types will directly define the leaf thickness. Meaning, if you have a 4.5 by 4.5 standard duty hinge, that will be 134 thousandths of an inch thick. If you have that same size hinge in a heavy duty, it will be 180 thousandths of an inch thick. Meaning, if you put a caliper on it, so as a point of reference, 1/8 of an inch is 0.125. This is a standard duty leaf thickness, so the caliper should tell me 134 thousandths. Okay, so my caliper is 0.135. That's the leaf thickness. Now, the leaf thickness is not to be confused with the gap between the two hinge leaves when they're brought parallel. And that dimension that's between the two leaves can be reviewed on the template. Now, I have the template for this hinge pulled up here, and we can review what that information is. So, here you're going to see our hinge. And what you've got there is, you can see that you've got the two leaves that are here. And we can refer down to the chart down below. We happen to be dealing with a BB5040. And that it's 134 thousandths thick. Okay. Now, what we've got here is, if you notice the gap between the two hinge leaves drawn right here, these two lines, it says 0.062, and 0.062 is a 1/16 of an inch. So the leaf thickness is not the total amount of leaf plus the gap between the two, although sometimes that's really important to know if you get into an application where you're doing a double mortise scenario where you're going to surface mount one leaf, but you want the door to maintain a tight margin against the jamb. But that's the dimension on a hinge like this. And while there is no hard and fast universal rule when it comes to the gap between two hinge leaves, because it does change, because a hinge can have different types of swag that's applied to the hinge leaf, and an example of that would be a typical full mortise hinge. A much more common hinge is going to be here. It's still 4.5 by 4.5 inch tall, but it's full mortise because of the swag that's on the hinge leaf, which is simply this curved, bent area underneath here. That's called the swag. This is a full mortise hinge. If you use your imagination and pretend as if this hinge did not have a bend on it whatsoever and was completely flat with the bottom of the barrel, that would be the swag difference. That would be a full surface hinge. Because imagine trying to apply this hinge in a full surface application, it wouldn't work. If I rest this hinge down onto a flat surface, it would rock back and forth over the barrel because it doesn't sit flat. That's the swag. The amount of swag is obviously going to be directly related to the amount of gap between the two hinge leaves. But when it's a full mortise hinge, it's reasoned that there must of course be some margin between the two hinge leaves when they're brought parallel in the closed position, so as to allow that minor gap between the hinge jamb of the frame and then the hinge style of the door, and that's where all of that comes in. No universal rules. It does change with every hinge type, hinge caliber, light, standard, heavyweight, and hinge size. All of that changes. So refer to documentation before making a determination as to what it would be. You want to double check that. Thank you.